And let's go live now to the Assistant Treasurer, Stephen Jones. Stephen Jones, thanks for your time. I want to start with that video that Trudy referred to, the self-proclaimed Nazi that sent a video with a balaclava on his head to Lydia Thorpe. It's low-rent stuff. What's your reaction to it?
Deplorable stuff. Can't be condemned strongly enough. It doesn't represent the views of mainstream of Australia. This is extremist, far right-wing propaganda, and I think most Australians would see it in the light that it should be seen as not representing them or their views.
On to a few other very current matters. We've got the floods and the fires underway at the moment, very early in the season for the fires. As Assistant Treasurer, does the government staff start to rethink the costs and the budgeting around? Because obviously it's a human tragedy in many respects, a lot of trauma, but it's very costly as well. And now we're getting these fires at the start of spring.
Yeah, look, a shout out to my mate Murray Watt, who's the Federal Minister for Emergency Services. Murray and the entire government have been looking at what went wrong in the 2019-20 bushfires, and particularly the then government's response, and we're adamant that we're not going to repeat any of those mistakes. So a lot of work has been put into over the last 3 months, ensuring that we're working in a coordinated way with the state and local authorities to firm up our preparedness, to ensure that we've got those emergency services arrangements in place. We're prepared for the worst and hoping that we don't have to swing into action. But if we do need to swing into action, you'll see joined up arrangements between state and local governments and the federal governments, and us doing everything we can to ensure that communities can stay safe and be protected if the worst goes wrong.
On to your area of responsibility and the budget and the economy. We've got this household spending data out today from the ABS. Transport up over 17%, household spending, fuel driving a big part of that. The non-discretionary costs like health as well up 8%. Discretionary things like furniture's down over 12%. Discretionary spending more broadly flat on the year. How do you read these numbers? Is it another sign of just how tough it is for people out there?
Look, this confirms, again, what we're seeing across the economy. The consumption is slowing down. The people are making choices around the household table, around what they can and can't afford. Obviously, transport, that's an essential. Food, energy, these are essentials. The essential services, insurance and healthcare and the like, these are essentials. Discretionary stuff is tapering off. And hopefully, as we see some of that pressure come out of the economy, we can see that we've reached peak inflation, and inflation starts to find its way down. And obviously that'll take pressure off the Reserve Bank as it considers its next decision around interest rates as well. So there's mixed news.
Is this sort of number...
I guess it's the takeout, Kieran. Yeah.
But do you think that these numbers make a rate rise more or less likely, given that's an increase in spending, but a lot of it is not out of choice. It's things like fuel and health.
Look, I don't want to speculate on what the Reserve Bank may or may not do at its next meeting, but what I can say is the combination of fairly tight fiscal policy and restraint in spending from the Albanese government, together with the targeted cost of living relief that we're putting in place, which in many places is putting downward pressure on inflation. We're doing our bit. We're seeing the results of those higher interest rates flow through the system in reduced discretionary spending. So, the measures are working as they were intended by both the Reserve Bank and the government in terms of its fiscal policy. We hope that we can continue to walk that narrow path, and as we head into next year, things can start to improve.
The draft bill for the superannuation tax changes released this week. Explain to our viewers how it's going to work in terms of unrealised gains. It's a bit complex, but the criticism has been that with your taxation of funds, balances over $3 million, that you're going to be taxing unrealised gains, and some concerns raised that farmers will have to sell farms, small business people have to sell their business. Is that something that can happen under this bill?
Can I just put it in a bit of context? Firstly, why are we doing this? To make the superannuation system more sustainable and fair. It receives considerable tax concessions to encourage people to save for their retirement. It's to produce retirement income, not for estate planning purposes or tax minimisation purposes. And we had to find a level where we thought it was fair, and balances above that will still receive concessional taxation treatment, but it'll be 30% on the balance above $3 million and instead of the 15% headline rate. We looked at how we could deal with capital, and frankly, it would have been far too complex to implement this policy in any other way than the way that we've put it in place. Importantly, it affects less than 0.5% of taxpayers. The majority of Australians today have around $200,000 in, well, that's the average, I should say, in their retirement, in their superannuation account at retirement. So the overwhelming majority of Australians won't be impacted. Under the existing rules, whether it's an SMSF or whether it's a large superannuation fund, you have to put in place arrangements that enable you to be able to pay your tax. Taxation currently applies to those funds above and below $3 million. So under the existing rules, there has to be sufficient liquidity within a fund to enable that fund to pay its taxation arrangements. So under the existing rules, money has to be put aside to ensure you can pay those sorts of bills. And that'll be doubly important under the new rules, which don't come into effect until after the next election.
But under the current situation, there's no taxation of unrealised gains, is there?
There is in large superannuation funds. When somebody exits a fund, an assumption is made on their contribution or their benefit in that unrealised in the capital component of their superannuation. I won't get into all the technical details, but the fact is that it does apply in large superannuation funds. And I'm not going to say to you that this is common, but it's not unheard of either, and it's the fairest and most efficient way that we could implement this important reform. It's all about making our superannuation system more efficient and more fair and more effective and more sustainable over the long term. And Kieran, the overwhelming majority of Australians will not be affected by it.
No, I get that. But just finally, can you just explain, for some small business people or farmers, they might have to change their arrangements, like sell a farm or a business to get that liquidity you're talking about?
I don't think that's going to be the case in the overwhelming majority of cases, Kieran. Those small businesses presumably are generating an income. That farm is presumably generating an income, and the income that is being generated from that farm or from that small business belongs to the superannuation fund if that business or asset is inside the superannuation fund, and the revenue that is being generated can be used to and should be used for paying that tax liability if one is incurred, just as it's required to pay for a tax liability under the existing arrangements. So too will it be available to pay for that tax liability under the large balance superannuation provisions when they come into effect after the next election.
Stephen Jones, appreciate your time.
Good to be with you.